Welcome to the channel. I'm Reza, and today we're diving into an essential feature of Unreal Engine, the color grading panel. This powerful tool centralizes all of your color adjustment settings, making it quick and easy to refine your scene's visuals. From the fine-tuning with commonly used properties to applying 1D LUTs for color grading or even leveraging color correction regions, this panel streamlines your workflow and puts everything you need at your fingertips. By the end of this video, you'll have the skills to enhance your project's mood and tone with precision and creativity. Let's get started and bring your visuals to life. Here I am inside the editor. What I have in the scene is a third-person blueprint. I've got Cine Camera Actor, which is spawnable, and a simple post-process volume. Let's see how we can bring in the dedicated interface for color grading panel in Unreal Engine. And that allows you to adjust the colors in your scene. I simply go to Windows and go to color grading, and you don't need to select anything. It might drop itself in the middle of the user interface. In that case, go ahead and dock it anywhere that you want. If you have the secondary monitor on the side, even better. First glance at the user interface, we have the toolbar, we have object mixer panel, and we have color grading properties. Now let's go from the top and briefly explain what each section does. So from the toolbar, you can add color grading capable actors to the scene. Basically, you can nominate any of these guys and add them to your level. So if I go ahead and add another post-process volume, not only it's going to add that in our object mixer panel, it's going to add that in the outliner and the overall list of our level. You can add a Cine Camera Actor, a Camera Actor, and Display Root Actor, which is for VR in games, and color correction region and color correction window, which I will get to somewhat through this session. They're extremely powerful. Now, you don't need to have all of them in the scene. Just think about how you would like to do your color correct through what of these guys and then drop them in. Right now, my color grading capable actors in the scene are the Cinecam that I have available, my post-process volume, and the secondary post-process volume that I just created. You can see the type, whether they're spawnable or not, whether on my level sequencer or not. At the moment, I just have the camera on my level sequencer, and that's why you notice that this one is set to LSCC, because that's the camera that I have in my sequencer. So that's what add does. Search is going to search among a long list of color grading capable actors that you might have in the object mixer panel. So if I go ahead, right click, edit, and rename this one, you can see it allows me to rename it in the outliner, and I'm going to call that post-process volume warm. Now all I need to do is just to type in warm, and it brings only that element in the scene. The next one is sync selection, and this allows me to synchronize selected actors in the object mixer panel with my level. So keep an eye on these two panels, color grading and outliner. Right now, with sync selection on, any actor that I select, it gets selected in the outliner as well. So if I turn it off, I can select whatever actor I want to select in the object mixer panel, There won't be any changes in there. And it's great if you want to focus on something in your outliner and work on something else in your color grading. So that's that. You can do organizing within this color grading panel as opposed to put them in a folder like so. So create a new folder here, create a new folder here, and we have settings where you can clear solo states if you make things solo, and create folders, not to create folders, and stuff like this, which I admittedly didn't use much. If I hover my mouse over any of these actors, you also get two icons. One toggles the visibility. I'm making the cine camera actor on my sequencer invisible, and the other one is to solo that. So I can solo cine camera actor and it's going to deactivate my post-processing. So have a look. This bloom, this lens flare comes from my post-processor. If I click, it deactivates it as well. So this is the mute and visibility right next to them. And that's pretty much what Object Mixer Panel is about. There's another functionality that you can benefit from. If you feel like you have a couple of post-process volumes, one for warm tone, another one for cool tone, you can select them and put them into a selection. So right-click, select or add to a selection, and I can go PPV for post-process volume, let's say warm. And if I enter, that filter pops up or collection pops up. I can right click on my camera and create the selection, camera, scene, click, and then I have one selection for camera and it selects my camera, and I can switch back to PPV warm and it only shows me my post-process volume. And of course you can select one, left click, hold. Once you get that tick, let go of the mouse and it's going to swap or switch their locations as well, which is more of a cosmetic look, has nothing to do with its functionality. So that's another way to access whatever you want to access. You can at any point of time right click, duplicate that. Let's say I'm going to create another post-process volume and I'm going to switch to all. And the third one can go, this one, PPV warm to my collection. So if I go to PPV warm, you can see I have now 3 post-process volumes in my collection. I can go ahead, delete, and right-click, select, right-click, and you can either rename or delete. I'm also going to get rid of these two since I created them and I have no use for it. That's pretty much all you need to know about Toolbar and Object Mixer Panel. I'm going to select one and let's talk about the color grading properties. You can see my color grading capable actor name shows up here. So whatever name you specify for your actor, you can see that here. So you're not going to confuse that with other actors. We can make adjustments for our coloration globally, and that's going to affect the entire scene. Then we can only color correct our shadows or our midtones or our highlights individually. You can be in the RGB color space, so you're targeting main channels R, G, and B, or you can switch to HSV and tweak hue, saturation, and values. I'm going to switch to RGB, and let's talk about these columns: saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, and offset. Let's start with saturation. Hopefully you have a general understanding of each one of them and what they do. But when you color grading, these terms are commonly used to describe different aspects of the color and tonal adjustments to the image. And that's why you kind of need to have a good understanding of what they do. Let's start with saturation. I'm going to be fairly quick about this, assuming that you have a general understanding. Basically, with saturation, it controls how colorful the image looks. Now I'm affecting the entire scene, not just the shadows, and I'm bringing a ton of color into the image, perhaps more than what I should be doing. I can go ahead and decrease that, and desaturating an image can give it a more neutral or cinematic tone, while oversaturating can make it look very vibrant and surreal based on what you want to do. I can deactivate that. Next, contrast. Now, contrast can make the image appear more dynamic. So if I reduce that, it can soften the look of my image. If I increase that, it makes the look of the image more dynamic. Reset, deactivate. Next, gamma, used for fine-tuning the overall brightness, not just in Unreal Engine, in any other application packages like Nuke. And you want to make sure that the image doesn't look too dark, like crushed shadows, or too bright, like blown out highlights. And for that, you adjust gamma. Next is gain, and gain is used for fine-tuning the exposure of the brightest area to make sure they're not overexposed or clip. It's one of those properties that you need to be super careful about. So I'm affecting the exposure, technically speaking. I can create a very stylized artistic look, or I can overexpose my image if I crank it up too high. Something to be mindful of. And the most interesting of all is offset. And this property brightens or darkens the whole image uniformly. I personally use offset to set a baseline exposure level. Now, you may have noticed that I have a global slider to increase this up and down, which is quite interesting. But a fun fact about color grading is, based on how big this window is, you can even reveal more information. So if I ever so slightly move this up, you can see now, instead of having one global slider for my entire saturation, I can increase saturation in my red channel on a global scale, or my shadow, or my midtone, or my highlights. And the reason it's RGB luminance is because I set RGB. If I switch to HSV, contrast, gamma, gain, and offset will switch to this color type. And the reason that saturation doesn't really obey the same rule is because saturation really refers to the intensity or purity of colors in your image. And to see that, you need to have RGB luminance present in the scene. Hope I explained this, but we are going to have some examples with it as well. Now, you may have noticed, apart from this, we have this little guy here showing up. And that is called Color Grading Property Overrides panel. So this section is always with you, and it works per actor. So what you set here is only for this actor, post-process volume. If I go to Cine Camera, I have something similar for my Cine Camera. I have another color grading property override panel for that selected actor. Now, what it does, because it says override in the name, it's not going to add an additional layer to what you already have. Is going to basically link itself to the correspondent properties in your outliner and overwrites it. For example, if I go to post-process volume in here and just type in exposure, you can see my exposure metering mode is set to auto. I can certainly set that to manual. And then I have this exposure compensation, which allows me to adjust the exposure, fix exposure in Unreal Engine, something that we more or less use almost all the time. Now this can be changed here. So we have exposure compensation here, exposure and compensation here. They're not two different properties, they're exactly the same. Once you're working with one of them, the other one gets activated. That's the only change. If I switch in here, like turn this off, enable this one instead, look at the value on the other side. I can go to 6 or to 12, and this one changes automatically, although it's been deactivated, because Unreal Engine is smart enough to know that I'm using the override value instead. So that is another really cool way of overwriting some of the key properties on this selected actor. So you have access to the temperature and temperature type, which you can set to white balance or color temperature. You can see right here. Then you have the temperature attribute itself, which is going to match the light temperature. The higher value that you use results in a warm tone. Lower values gives you the cooler tone or blue tone. And then you have tint, which is going to fine-tune the white balance by adjusting mainly cyan and magenta tones. Sometimes your character is in a really funky environment where there's not much white balance. The scene is greenish or bluish because of the fluorescent lights that you're using, let's say, and that tint becomes handy to adjust those values. So it mainly affects the cyan if I lower it, and magenta if I increase the tint value. So you can see the strong presence of magenta color in the scene as well. And so on and so forth. You get the work with the highlights, you get to work with the shadows and shadow max. And more interestingly, you can go in here and add color grading LUT. I was kind of thinking about this, whether should I create a separate tutorial for color grading LUT. I'm happy to do a quick demo on a 1D LUT, but for 3D LUT or lookup tables, I definitely need to have a separate tutorial ready for you guys. I will get to how to create a 1D LUT in this tutorial, and I even give you some samples that I personally made, lookup table samples, both in EXR and Cube extension, so you guys can pick it up from my Patreon and use that in your own projects. All right, that was a really quick look at what these components and panels are. Let's go to the next chapter and drill a little bit deeper into some of these elements. For example, what's going to happen if I want to bring in color correction region, if I want to only color correct a region. You may have noticed that this blueprint right here cannot be brought into my mixer panel. It's not compatible. It's not color grading capable actor. And let's say, hypothetically, that's exactly what you want to color correct. Well, let's find out in the next chapter. Up to now, whatever we've done on the entire scene. So if I want to go into saturation and make the scene look more colorful, I'm doing it on the entire scene. What if I want to only target a region? Let's say it's a hot day, this environment is scorching hot and the character is made out of metal. I want to do a little bit of color grading on the feet and have a nice fading effect as well. So more like a gradient fading out to the entire body. Well, you cannot do that with a typical color grading capable actors. You have to use a tool called color correction region. It's a plugin, so I need to go into plugin and I'm scrolling down and find other, and in here color correction regions. As you can see, mine is enabled. If it's disabled, tick it restart your engine, and you should have it. Now, where to find it? Two ways. The first way is you bring up place actors and you find it under volumes. We have color correction regions. Or you go into add into your object mixer panel. From the toolbar, you find color correction region. I can drop that in, and it's going to drop a copy on my outliner as well. And that gives me this little guy, this volume, which I can kind of play around with. I'm going to move it up. I can reposition it. I can go in here and scale it if I want to in 2D or uniformly in 3D. The snapping works on it as well. So I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer to my character. And let's say I want this volume to do the color grading only on this region. Now, there's a very big change that you need to make in order to activate this, and that is through project settings. Right now, by default, it's not going to work. You need to activate a property. And that is under engine. I'm going to go ahead and find rendering. And you can type in custom depth or go into post-processing. I collapsed everything for you, so it's nice and easy to find. And switch custom depth stencil pass from enable to enable with stencil. It's going to generate depth buffer and stencil at the same time, whereas with enable it only generates depth buffer. So with that change made, now you can change your saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, or offset, and it's going to only have an impact on the area of interest. So I'm going to increase saturation. I'm going to increase contrast a little bit, play around with gamma and change the gain and offset that ever so slightly. And as you can see, I'm getting this change only within that volume, only on the feet and the ground, because that's the area that I have the volume. Right? Very straightforward. You may say, Reza, can we change the attributes or the properties of that volume? Absolutely. You can select the color correction and go in here. You can change the type from sphere into box, into cylinder, and into cone. So that's that. You have a priority. And priority is where you have multiple color correction region. So let's say I'm going to add another color correction region, and I'm going to, let's say, desaturate. Now, right now they're working independent of each other, but if I move this one here, right, the question will be which one is going to take over, and that is going to get defined by the priority. So lower number takes priority. I'm going to remove that for now. Then we have inner and outer, and that is going to define how sharp this edge is going to be. So if I increase inner to match outer, you can see I'm getting a razor sharp area around my volume, within my volume. So to create that fall off, I always reduce the inner to give this a little bit of fall off. You can increase outer as well, but be careful because you might run into some clipping. So I'm not going to usually go over one. I just change the inner or tweak the inner to create that fall off. And then we actually have the fall off, which starts from the center of my volume and goes all the way outward, and it specifies how much of that volume you're going to use. So you can see I can increase my inner and increase my fall off to get that perfect circle that's the same diameter as the volume. So that's another way to readjust your attributes and get that sweet spot. If you want, there is a handy invert button that I can click. Now everything is affected but the region that I have selected, right? So that is also possible. Now I'm going to scroll down, enable color grading. That's going to obviously deactivate the effect if you don't want the color correction regions to work for you. And then temperature type to color temperature. You can see this section is also available here as well. If I scroll down, you can see color grading section again, cherry picks all the important key properties in here for you to overwrite if you want to. Now the rest is pretty self-explanatory apart from this area right here, per actor CC, and that is extremely useful. Now right now I'm affecting both the ground and the character. What if I just want to affect the ground? Enable per CC gets enabled, and in actor selection you need to specify an actor. So I'm going to go into add elements, I get my color picker, and I pick the BP third person character and switch to exclude selected actor. Now this is going to only affect the ground. I can do the opposite, affect only the selected actor, and it's going to only have an impact on the character. How cool is that? So these are all the changes that you can make to your color grading and to the region that you're color grading. Now there is another type called color correction window, and that is a 2D version of that 3D volume looking color correction region. Honestly, they both work exactly the same. This is more suited for flat surfaces. So if I select that and scroll up to get to the type, you can see the type is only square and circle, and both of them are flat, whereas the color correction regions is more of a volumetric sort of asset where you can even drop into the level sequencer. I can enable transform and keyframe its location even if I want to. So pretty handy stuff, but they both look the same. If you find yourself doing this too often, you have multiple color correction for multiple regions. Let's say you want to darken an area in the far background or brighten an area in the left corner, then you create multiple color correction regions or windows, and then you can add them to a selection. So I can do CCR and I have the selection selected, only using those within my object mixer panel instead. So very handy, very easy to use, and make sure to use that when the situation calls for it. It's a great way to fine-tune and adjust the colors of the environment and objects in your scene. Now, there is only one topic left to explain, and that is, if I go into my post-process volume, is this color grading LUT or lookup table. All right, let's go to the next chapter and talk about color grading LUT as our final chapter. Now I'm going to go ahead and disable my color correction region, and let's focus on post-processing 1D LUT. So if I go all the way into miscellaneous, somewhere in the color grading section, all the way down, we have color grading LUT, which is again, same thing as what you see here as well. Now, color grading LUTs are extremely useful. Think of them in a simpler form as Instagram filters, right? It can change the look of your level. So artists use 1D LUTs to give their scene a cinematic or stylized color grading look, and you don't need to go through a laborious task of changing bits and pieces. You can actually make your color grading LUT and just simply import it and give the instant look. And it still works in conjunction with saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, and offset. You still can change those and add layers of complexity to your final output. There's only one thing that I'm not going to talk about, and that is 3D LUTs. And while 1D LUT only works on a single color channel at the time, like red, green, and blue, 3D LUT can manipulate all three channels simultaneously, which is a more sophisticated color grading, definitely beyond the scope of this tutorial. Now, in the content browser, I have a section called LUT, and I have a bunch of 1D LUTs available to you. All I need to do is just to go in there, drag and drop, and instantly you get a cool look. Sepia and warm. You may say, hang on a second, Reza, how did you make these? You won't believe how easy that is to make that. All you need is to have a baseline, a neutral LUT, and you can download that from the Epic Games website. I put the link in the description so you guys can easily right click, save that as a PNG, and get to work. But let's create one from scratch, and to do that I need Photoshop. So let's open Photoshop. So here I am in Photoshop, and I've loaded the neutral 1D LUT in Photoshop. All I need is a screenshot of my level. Now I'm in Unreal Engine. First things first, I'm going to remove the existing LUT because I want the actual colors. I'm gonna go into high resolution screenshot, maybe higher resolution won't harm, and capture. I'm now saving the screenshot. Let's switch back to Photoshop and drag and drop that in here. Now I can start color grading using adjustment layers. Let's say I want to ever so slightly apply level. So make it just a tad darker. And I'm totally improvising here. Let's say I'm going to add photo filter and give it a slight cool, some sort of a color to it. Give it a more of a cinematic look, and I'm going to go into hue, saturation, and I'm going to ever so slightly desaturate my work. Now that's all good. I'm going to select all of these guys, click on the folder to create a group, and I'm going to call that color adjustments. Fantastic. Let's go in here. Time to drag and drop this color adjustment folder onto this neutral 1D LUT. So I can just simply Control C, go into this image, Control V, and you can see instantly the look of my LUT is going to change. So I'm just going to save that as PNG. So Control Shift Alt and S gives me this save to web, which I can use. PNG 24 transparency on, that's totally okay. I'm going to save, and our job is done. Let's switch back to Unreal Engine. Now it's time to bring in the new LUT that we have created. I'm just going to drag and drop it in here. It drops itself there. Now, very important, if I double click in here, very important, you need to make two changes, and you have to do it immediately before you forget. So I'm going to collapse all of these guys. In level of detail, you need to make sure that in MIP Gen setting, no MIP maps is selected. And in texture group, if I type in look, color lookup table or LUT is selected. I'm going to save. I'm going to go into my level, and all I need to do now is to drag and drop, and I get the same look. How cool is that? Now you can add that to your scene, and start adjusting on top of it. So let's say I want to add a little bit of color tint through the window override. And now you can see I'm adjusting my existing color through 1D LUT and just move and add to that. Give it a little bit of decontrast. I'm lowering the contrast here as well and get a slightly different look. So we covered so many topics here and there: the user interface, the role of these important properties, how to use color correction regions, and how to bring in 1D LUTs, how to create 1D LUTs in Photoshop. That should be enough for one video. I will definitely create more complementary videos, and I'm going to pick up where we left off to explain more on color grading, and of course, I promise I dedicate a video on 3D LUT as well, because it's just incredible the way that you can work with 3D LUTs inside Unreal Engine. Also, as a bonus, these are all the LUTs that I've spent the time and made in Photoshop, and you can see the tweak, the change between the default and the end result. Default, end result, more of a cinematic look. And feel free to go into my Patreon page and pick them up if you want to. That wraps up this tutorial. This will likely be my last video before we celebrate Christmas and ring in the new year. So I wanted to take a moment and thank you for all of your incredible support, whether through Patreon memberships or your kind words on social media. Honestly, when I started this channel, I never imagined I'd still be creating content nearly 4 years later, but your encouragement has kept me going. So I'm thankful for that. As we step into 2025, I have so many exciting topics planned and lined up, and I cannot wait to share them with you. If you're celebrating, I wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance. Take care and see you all in 2025.